Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. On Tuesday's briefing, we discussed the case of Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr., whose son was killed by Cincinnati police and who himself has been charged in the death of a sheriff's deputy. I also alluded to the fact that later that day, the so-called Attorney General of Ohio was going to hold a press conference where he would threaten and otherwise try to coerce the crowdfunding website GiveSendGo to refund any money that had been donated on Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr.'s behalf. This is something that has never happened with any DA or any prosecutor anywhere. But this is not a DA. This is the state attorney general, who, by the way, is not involved in the prosecution of Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr.
However, we are not in the attorney general's office engaged with this case. If we were, some of the things I'm about to say, I probably shouldn't say. And I want to make it clear that our non-involvement is a precondition to my presence here today. Take down this site and refund the money to the donors, appealing to them not as a matter of law, because under current Ohio law, there are significant limits to what I can do.
So the Attorney General himself admits that he has no jurisdiction here. He shouldn't even be speaking, and were this a white defendant, he wouldn't be. All he can legally say in this case is, we stand in solidarity with the family of the deputy, we think the case is a strong one, blah, 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 but that's it. So why is this clown even talking? Perhaps because Dave Yost tried and failed to become governor, and he's now trying to maintain his name recognition for whatever it's worth, as he looks for whatever office he will try and fail to attain next.
We shouldn't be crowdfunding an evildoer. The competitor to this site, GoFundMe, is a good citizen in this matter. They actually have a policy that says we don't do crowdfunding for people who are accused of violent crime. This is a good policy, but this would be a fairly easy law to write, that crowdfunding is not available if you're a criminal defendant. There's a constitutional right to have a crime, or to have a defense against a crime, and the city of Cincinnati and the county of Hamilton and the state of Ohio are going to provide an indigent defendant with the resources to do that if they're unable to provide it for themselves. That's different than going out on the street and using technology to crowdfund nationally. I think that it's a horrible use of the charitable system, and I'm against it.
But you see what it is that he's saying. He wants to outlaw defendants having a robust defense at all. He's claiming that, well, you shouldn't be able to actually hire a lawyer unless you personally have the funds for it. If you got to ask somebody else, can they help you pay for a lawyer? Well, you shouldn't be able to do that. You should just be able to have some sort of public defender. That's what he said. He wants to dictate what kind of defense a defendant is allowed to have. In other words, he wants to legalize making it where a defendant can only have a part-time nobody who doesn't have the interest, the resources, or the skill to adequately defend them in court. He's trying to set up predetermined outcomes in these courtrooms. This is white power trying to bolster its own flagging courage through a blatant and illegal public display.
We have looked. I've had several questions. There was, some of you may remember, the Son of Sam law. I've looked at that statute. I've also looked at Title 17 of the Ohio Revised Code, which discusses the rules and requirements around charitable fundraising. And I don't see anything at the moment that jumps out as a clear legal theory under current law. The Son of Sam law was not written. In fact, it was before we had such a thing as crowdfunding, a relatively recent phenomenon.
He admits that there is no law to undergird his asinine demands. He has absolutely nothing to support any of this would-be threats that he's trying to make. There's nothing legal about what he's doing. There's certainly nothing moral about it. Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr. has only been accused of an offense. He hasn't been proven guilty of anything because there hasn't been a trial. So what is he doing getting in front of the cameras in a case that he himself admits that he's not actually prosecuting? His office has nothing to do with it. He also admits that there is no law to undergird his asinine demands. And on top of that, he shows up with some police union pimp who claims that he's representing the interests of the family of the deputy. That being the case, what is he even doing there? This is supposed to be about government officials, but they're showing everybody that they're going to blur the line. There's not going to be a distinction. Well, I think that GiveSendGo, with all these threats being made against them, they should issue a statement saying, we have investigated ourselves and found that we have no wrongdoing. We have determined that we have not violated our own terms of service, and hence the investigation is now closed. That's what they should do. Why? Because that's what the Cincinnati police does. That's what this Yost character does. That's what the police unions do. So that's what GiveSendGo should do. Say, hey, the police investigate themselves and they always find no wrongdoing. We've investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. No harm, no foul. Now, eventually, this State Attorney General Yost character made the mistake of actually accepting reporters' questions. And what happened was that's when things went off the rails. One reporter pointed out to this Yost guy that the crowdfunding doesn't actually say that it's for Mr. Hinton Jr.'s defense.
It would be a little trickier, though, even though what you're saying is, because I was looking at this myself, and it never really mentions defense fund that I could see in there. Doesn't that make it trickier if they kind of allude to the fact that we're trying to help his mental health, and couldn't people get around any kind of, reasonable... I see how a company can make a policy like that, but it's difficult. Wouldn't it be difficult for a state to make a policy? Because now you've got to sort out whether they're trying to make a defense fund or some medical issue. Does that make it more difficult?
The only reason anybody cares about this is the violent crime that was committed and the way that it is being whipped up by some people into a cause celeb. I think it should be the policy of Ohio that crowdfunding platforms are not permitted to raise money on the backs of a notorious and disgusting crime, period.
But it is a crime that has been accused, not convicted.
And you know what?
Just trying to get a defense and raise money for the defense of a crime.
Well, first of all, that's not what the page says, and I'm going to push back on your bad facts.
So any sort of law that he's claiming that he wants the legislature to write, that wouldn't stop it. Because that's true. The GiveSendGo account does not say this is being collected for Mr. Hinton Jr.'s legal defense. In fact, it doesn't really say much of anything at all other than just general support. And it didn't stop there either. This Yost guy became so flustered, all it took was for one reporter to give him some minor pushback on his BS, and he got so angry that he totally forgot his earlier lies, and instead he came right out and said, if you're a criminal defendant, then you shouldn't be able to crowdfund a defense.
But this would be a fairly easy law to write, that crowdfunding is not available if you're a criminal defendant.
He stopped saying, if you've been accused of a violent crime, if you've been charged with a violent crime, you shouldn't be able to crowdfund. Then he just said, no, if you are a criminal defendant, period. Notice how he made that change? He dropped the whole violent offender line, and he just said, if you're a criminal defendant in general, if he charges you, or if you're charged by a prosecutor, well, you shouldn't be able to crowdfund, period. So it's not about violence, is it? Once he got agitated, he came out and said it. This is about making sure that he can just railroad people into prison and that they have no defense, period. Now, shouldn't that also go for the police as well? If you're a police officer who gets accused of a crime, then you shouldn't be able to go to the Fraternal Order of Police for any sort of legal defense. You should have to pay for it out of your own pocket. And if you can't, well, you get whatever public defender is willing to take your case. But even then, nobody can give them any money. You got to fund it out of your own pocket.
Cincinnati and the county of Hamilton and the state of Ohio are going to provide an indigent defendant with the resources to do that if they're unable to provide it for themselves. That's different than going out on the street and using technology to crowdfund nationally. I think that it's a horrible use of the charitable system, and I'm against it.
See, this Yost guy is saying that only people who are independently wealthy, who can afford to actually get the experts and the independent witnesses who are going to represent them in court, they're the only ones who should be able to do that. Everybody else, well, you don't.
The public has a right to want to intervene in how you're going to raise money from every sympathetic person across the country. It's going to make this very asymmetric.
He falsely claims that the public has a right to intervene in how people raise money for their legal defense. That's a lie. The public does not. Because earlier he had been whining that the public was whipped up against the police. Well, it's not the public who was standing in front of those cameras. It was just a corrupt, racist state's attorney general and a gang of crooked cops. This is not the public he was talking about. Otherwise, people would be in the streets protesting GiveSendGo. Instead, they're protesting the Cincinnati police. And he was also whining that if defendants are able to raise legal defense funds from people all over the country, they can just get money from people all over. Well, that's going to make things very asymmetric. That's a lie. What it does is it makes the playing field level. That's what it does. That's the part that he hates. Prosecutors have an unfair advantage because they've got millions of dollars, millions of taxpayer dollars at their disposal whenever they bring their fraudulent cases against black defendants. And virtually none of these defendants has the same money as the prosecutors do, because prosecutors have the unlimited resources of the public. They can literally weaponize your own taxpayer dollars against you. That is asymmetrical, because you have almost no defendants who have anything near the resources of these DA's offices. So this Yost character, he's fine with things being completely and thoroughly asymmetrical, just so long as it's always lopsided in his favor. Right now, all Mr. Hinton Jr. has is a mere $50,000. Compared to the unlimited resources of the DA's office, that is not even a drop in the bucket, it's barely a drop in the ocean. How the hell does 50 grand compare to millions of dollars that the county DA has? Answer, it doesn't. And yet this Attorney General of Ohio, he feels that the state's case is apparently so weak that the county's millions of dollars in state funding isn't equal to a mere 50 grand raised from strangers online. Well, that tells you everything you need to know about how strong Yost thinks the case is. And apparently, even he knows it's weak.
Every sympathetic person across the country is going to make this very asymmetric.
And we were curious about what you said you might have some avenues to approach.
Yeah, see how he ran. When the heat got too hot, the bastard fled the scene of the crime. And this, his collaborator, this weasel Gotts, what's his name, he immediately took to the podium next. Now, if he was a member of the Attorney General's office, that'd be fine, but he's not. Apparently, he's representing the interest of the deputy who they're claiming that Mr. Hinton Jr. had killed. And notice that he didn't wait to be given the stage. He didn't ask. He just stepped forward as if he was a state prosecutor or something. This is nothing but Jim Crow here. The state has a burden of proof, and it seems Yost is terrified that they can't actually meet that burden. So now he's attempting to illegally deprive Mr. Hinton Jr. of adequate counsel. It is the responsibility of every defense attorney to make the prosecution prove their case. And Yost has never complained about this before. So why is he complaining now? When you have a black man being accused of a crime, nothing says racially unbiased, quite like having a lineup of all white police and all white prosecutors and slimy shyster lawyers in front of the cameras. Nothing says this isn't racial quite like that. These scumbags aren't even being subtle about it. They want to make it clear that this is white power trying to put up some kind of half-brained offense. These are horrible optics. But they don't care, because these are the optics they want. White power is about having exclusive power to do whatever they want. They're trying to reinforce that fallacy, and obviously it's not going very well. So they're trying to retreat to the old, I'm white and I say so. We need some white fiat up in here. We got some crooks in the state legislature who say that they're going to outlaw these crowdfunding websites. Never mind the fact that even the Supreme Court has ruled that money is free speech. And yet they're sitting here saying, well, we don't want you giving money to a defendant just because they don't like it. Well, in that case, then I say that the local DA's office should have to pay for any prosecution out of their own personal pockets. They should not be able to use taxpayer funds. The DA should fund the prosecutions out of their own state pay. And if they can't afford it, well, then that means the case shouldn't be brought. All of this is being done against a single individual who has not even been brought to trial yet. He hasn't had his day in court. He has, however, been assaulted by the police. Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr. is an innocent man. The Constitution says that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And yet you've got the state attorney general and a shyster, slimy lawyer saying that he's a murderer, saying that he's an evildoer, saying that he's a criminal, all the rest of it. They can't actually say that. Not legally they can't. That's slandering the man. To be calling him a murderer and calling him an evildoer and everything else without trial, that has got to be actionable on some grounds or another.
There's no accountability about how these funds are distributed. And let's not kid ourselves. They're not under oath when they write out those blurbs on GiveSendGo. They can write whatever they want to circumvent and use the argument, circumvent this public policy and use the argument you just raised about this is for my criminal defense. I guarantee you this money is not being used for criminal defense dollars.
Now, do you hear what this slimy lawyer said? He guarantees that money is not being used for criminal defense. He's speaking in the present tense, that the money is right now not being used for a criminal defense. That's impossible for a sane person to say. First of all, the GiveSendGo crowdfunding is still ongoing. It's not over yet. That's the entire reason that you got all of these white politicians and figures who are so upset and are demanding that there be refunds, because no money has been given out yet, and they're trying to stop that from happening. So Mr. Hinton Jr.'s family hasn't gotten a single dime yet. The money's not being used for anything at this point. It's not going to lawyers or anything else because no one's gotten the funds. Secondly, even if the money had already been sent out, how can this fool say that the money is not going to be used for legal defense? Is he part of the family? Has he seen what their plans are? He himself admitted that he would have to use civil legal maneuvers to find out what the family's doing with the money, so he has no clue, yet he talks like he already knows. What he's doing is slander. Even as a lawyer, for him to accuse the family of fraud, to accuse them of collecting money under fraudulent circumstances and pretenses, to claim that he can guarantee that they're not going to use it for the reasons that they said that they have, that's slander, and that's actionable in court. This is white supremacist arrogance and stupidity on full display. That's why his pal had to step in later, because it was pretty obvious this fool was stepping in it big time. The family of Rodney Hinton Jr. should be suing this lawyer, if he can be called that, suing him for slander. He's slandering them. Have you ever seen a DA or a state attorney general appear with the family of a black citizen who was murdered by the police? Has that ever happened even once? And yet these same crooks can't wait to stand side by side with whatever fraternal order of police pimp gets hired to defend the thugs with badges. And speaking of the local DA's office, you notice how they're not saying anything about this attorney general sticking his nose into their case? Shouldn't they be telling him that this is a local matter and to leave it alone? But they're not. This is undeniably a coordinated effort between the Attorney General of the state and this lawyer and the people he's allegedly representing. This is the government of Ohio working hand in hand with all of these parties in order to try to prejudice the jury and the public against a defendant. When it comes to things like murder, calling someone a murderer and such, that's a legal designation. It's the reason that news outlets say that someone is accused of killing or that they allegedly did thus and so. That's why they use the word allegedly so much. This is prejudicial with this attorney general and this lawyer and such are doing. Qualified immunity doesn't protect this kind of behavior. I have a legislative counterproposal, though, that when some thug with a badge is accused of harming a black citizen, or anyone for that matter, they cannot crowdfund their defense. They have to only use whatever money they got in their own pockets. They can't use or have access to police union funds. By the way, the public shouldn't be forced to pick up the tab every time one of these degenerates murders someone. And this scumbag is calling an innocent man who hasn't had his day in court an evildoer and claiming that there should be no crowdfunding for an alleged violent offense. But Kyle Rittenhouse also used GiveSendGo for his legal defense. And what a surprise, turns out that there were a lot of police officers and people in law enforcement who were giving money to that creep. And how many of those cops who gave money to a man that they knew had killed 2 people in cold blood, how many of those cops were from Ohio? Due to privacy restrictions, we don't know, but it's safe to say more than a few. I can guarantee that money that came into Kyle Rittenhouse came from cops in Ohio. I can guarantee that. And yet these are the people who are suddenly complaining about crowdfunding now. None of these people who were in front of the cameras pretending to care about public safety and human life were opposed to Kyle Rittenhouse's crowdfunding. Where was Dave Yost or the police unions or their bought and paid for illegal harlots to say that they wanted legislation changed back then? They were nowhere to be seen because they were the ones supporting Rittenhouse. And just for the record, after that kangaroo court took place, Rittenhouse and his lawyers were having fistfights over the remaining money left over and how it was going to be split. So he was profiting from what he had done, and so were they. He didn't give the money away, though. He killed 2 people, then immediately said, whatever money's left over, I want that. And afterwards, he was going on TV and making CPAC appearances. Also, this is a lie to claim that Mr. Hinton Jr. is profiting from anything. First of all, he has not received a single dime of the money that's been crowdfunded. And second of all, it's not for his own personal bank account. The funds are being raised, at least the people who are giving the money are doing so because they believe it's going to go to some sort of legal defense. There's absolutely nothing that says, give money to Rodney Hinton Jr., he wants to buy something. The lawyers and whatever experts and investigators that Mr. Hinton Jr. is going to hire, they are the ones who are quote-unquote profiting because they're the ones who the money's going to go to. What this is about is white power trying to pull an "I'm white and I say so." They see the support that this man is getting, and they also know that this is going to translate to a jury pool, so they're trying to stack the deck against him now and use whatever illegal or unscrupulous means they can. And when they decide to try to do one of these legislative end runs around the law, notice that they only do it in response to a black defendant. You had a mob of white supremacists who stormed the U.S. Capitol. Where's the ton of laws that were meant to stiffen penalties for anyone who attacks Capitol Hill police or trespasses on Capitol Hill grounds? Hell, where's even one law that's been passed? There were none. When white people do something, there's never a legislative response, never an attempt to bolster the laws so as to point them out and say, hey, these are people who the law needs to be attached to. We need to go ahead and make the laws tougher. But whenever a black person is accused of anything, we see these same white supremacists in public office who immediately start screaming, we need new laws. Doesn't matter if they're constitutional or not. We need more laws. So this creep Yost, he knows that he's trying to influence and prejudice the public against a man who has not been even put on trial yet, and he's making demands of a company that he has no legal grounds to do so, for a case that his office isn't even handling and has no jurisdiction over. Now, the first thing to remember is that this weasel Yost tried and failed to run for governor, and yes, he was running as a Republican, so that lets you know where he's coming from. But there's also something else that needs to be discussed. We still don't know the identity of Ryan Hinton's killer. That's how all this got kicked off. The Cincinnati police chief is saying that they don't have to disclose that, and she's ridiculously claiming that it's because of some Marsy's Law. Now, for those of you who don't know, Marsy's Law is legislation, basically novelty legislation, that came out of California. In the early 1980s, a white woman named Marcy Nicholas was killed by her boyfriend. On their website, they claimed that Marcy's mother was confronted, quote-unquote, in the checkout line of a grocery store by Marcy's killer, who the family had no idea was out on bail pending trial. Marsy's Law had to do with notifications to the families, the survivors, or victims like that, but it also has a provision that's alleged to have privacy concerns for the victims of crimes. Now, what does that have to do with the murder of Ryan Hinton? The police chief's claiming that the killer who shot Ryan dead claimed that a gun was pointed at him, so the police chief's saying that that makes the cop a victim of a crime. She says it was something like menacing or something like that. I'm not making that up. She actually had the nerve to say that. Ryan Hinton was the one who was killed. He was the victim here. And yet she's claiming that the shooter was the victim, even though by her own admission, the body camera footage makes it impossible to see exactly what was happening. No claim of someone was pointing a gun at anyone can be sustained from that crappy video. But the police chief claimed that that gives them the ability to invoke Ohio's own Marsy's Law, and hence the public has no right to know who the killer is. And let's be honest here. We've seen this with a number of police departments across America. They've decided to respond to the social justice movements to hold the police accountable for the crimes they commit by saying, well, we're going to pass laws making it where you can't get body camera footage. We're going to be passing laws saying that you are not allowed to video the police. We're going to be passing laws saying that we're going to make it illegal to disclose who the police are. We don't want you to know who these killers are. We want the murderers to operate behind a legal shield of anonymity. Because if the public knows who these guys are, that's how they put maximum pressure to bring them to account, and we don't want them to be punished. Race soldiers have to be able to operate with impunity, otherwise they can't enforce the illegal system of white supremacy. We don't know the service record of Ryan Hinton's killer. We don't know how many citizens' complaints are against him and his collaborators. We don't know how many people he's killed. We don't know whether he's been sued in the past for racial profiling or police brutality, the way that Daniel Pantaleo was before he murdered Eric Garner. We don't know how many times he's been cited for unauthorized use of force or anything else. Has the perpetrator been moved on from multiple police departments like Timothy Loman was before he murdered Tamir Rice? The public has a prevailing interest in knowing who the killer is. The public has a right to know. And by going to such extreme lengths to conceal his identity, the Cincinnati police are clearly worried about what the public will find out. This is not about protecting anyone. This is about what we warned you these crooks were going to do, that they would start going to illegal lengths to just blatantly defy and ignore the law in order to conceal the identities of these killers, in the hopes that the public, having been deprived of the identity of the killer, won't be able to focus public pressure on making sure the killer is brought to justice. That's what they're hoping is going to happen. Meanwhile, they make sure that everybody knows exactly who Rodney Hinton Jr. is, and they make sure to say everything that they can defamatory about this man, slander him, lie about him, just say whatever, all in the hopes that we want the public to know ahead of time this guy's supposed to be guilty. The state attorney general has committed a crime by even weighing in on this. And this little display of theirs was meant to show everyone that all the forces of evil in the state are trying to band together. Rodney Hinton Jr. is innocent unless and until he has had his day in court. He's not in the wrong here. Dave Yost and the police and that slimy lawyer are. The public is supporting Mr. Hinton Jr., and if you're a moral person, then you have to ask why. What is it about the police in Cincinnati that's turned the public against them? Perhaps it's racist trash like Ray Tensing, who killed a black man dead for no reason and was wearing a Confederate flag t-shirt under his police uniform. That's the very definition of a race soldier. And yet prosecutors intentionally engineered a mistrial in order to save him from prison. Dave Yost and these other criminals are on the defensive. And the public's going to keep them there. So what the enemy's attempting to do now is to try to engineer a complete and thorough monopoly for themselves. They want to make sure that you're not able to defend yourself against any charges they bring against you. He gave the game away. He started off lying and saying, well, this is about violent charges. If you've been charged with a violent crime, you shouldn't be able to crowdfund a defense. Then he slipped up and said, if you're a criminal defendant, period. It doesn't matter if it's civil, criminal. If there's been charges brought against you, you shouldn't be able to ask anybody else for money for a legal defense. Well, black citizens are going to have to step up in the state of Ohio and begin coordinating efforts to punish Dave Yost and anyone else who illegally interferes with a law-abiding citizen's right to a fair trial. Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr.'s race is the only reason this is happening. The man has no felony record. Hence, he shouldn't even be in jail right now. This being his first offense, he should be at home awaiting trial, just like every cop who's gunned down a black person has been. The prejudice that's been brought against him is clear and undeniable, and the public can see it. The black community out there is going to have to take these forces on. That means a ballot initiative to safeguard the means for defendants to get legal defense money from whomever wants to support them. Because it wasn't a problem when undeniable killers like Rittenhouse did it. So we're not going to let the bastards say it's a problem now. Also, the public has to have the ability to strip qualified immunity from elected officials like Dave Yost who abuse their elected office in order to undermine a defendant's constitutional right to a robust defense and to punish Yost for trying to influence and prejudice a jury against someone. Also, the public must be working to make it illegal for police unions to fund the legal defense of any officer accused of a violent crime. Dave Yost himself has established that standard, so we should force them to live by it. All the police unions should be able to do is to use their money to fund their asinine efforts to get pay raises and to pay funeral expenses for their members, which, by the way, is all the police unions are supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be paying for legal defenses for criminals who gun down citizens, like they did for Kyle Rittenhouse. The black media has been saying for years that these white supremacists would lose their minds when black people start concentrating their dollars for people's legal defense funds. You've had YouTube attack videos saying that. And here they are in public crashing out. They've done everything that they could with their white media allies to try to slow down the progress of this particular movement, to try to silence it, and it hasn't worked. They have no legal basis. The Attorney General of Ohio is illegally weighing in on a case. They have no public support either. They're just trying to see what they can get away with. The law is clear. Mr. Rodney Hinton Jr. is an innocent man, and only a jury can call him guilty, not the corrupt Attorney General or some crooked lawyer or the dirty cops like that Cincinnati police chief. The real question we should be asking is how to force the disclosure of Ryan Hinton's killer. The public has a right to know, and they're demanding to know, and the authorities are illegally concealing that information. We have no idea what criminality that individual's been involved in. As we've seen with every other case where police gun down a black citizen, they all have tons of citizens' complaints against them. Without knowing the perpetrator, we can't be sure that this is not just another massive police cover-up, like it was with the murder of Laquan McDonald. This so-called press conference makes it clear that there's a lot of scared white supremacists in Ohio. They've had it all their own way, but the blue wall's beginning to crack, and that terrifies them. So they're illegally concealing the identity of killers, they're illegally trying to prejudice the public against defendants, and illegally attempting to squelch free speech, which is what the U.S. Supreme Court themselves said money is. Their powers of white fiat are breaking down, as is their legitimacy. Before it's all over, all of them could very well find themselves on the receiving end of the very legal threats and illegal coercion that they're attempting to perpetrate. And should that happen, It's going to take a hell of a lot more than a crowdfunding to keep them from having to face the music. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Valisa Hollins, Rochelle Rollins, G. Mars, Sakina Collins, and Anthony Pollard. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.